Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose, and I guess it's happening. This generation doesn't exactly feel like it's been around all that long, and in fact, we just now gotten to the point where the PlayStation 5 is readily available. They have, however, managed to flood the market this year, but hang on, we might get our chance for yet another hard-to-find item sometime relatively soon, as it sounds like a big upgrade is on the way. Also, Xbox revealed some more details on their upcoming showcase this June. I do think that they need a home run hit here, and, well, it actually does sound rather promising, so we're going to get into that as well. Per usual, though, before we get started, just a little reminder on those buttons below. It does help the channel a ton. It's also a great way for you to stay up to date with all of the daily gaming news, so do make sure to hit that subscribe, like, and, of course, bell button as well. With that said, though, let's just go and jump right into it, starting off with a hot new game for really all the wrong reasons, being Redfall. Unfortunately, this game hasn't exactly met expectations or really even close to them in this case, but reportedly that might not necessarily be all that surprising to Microsoft themselves. Now, this is coming from the often leaky Jeff Grubb over on his podcast, where he claimed Microsoft never really believed in Redfall. This game instead was apparently in development before the Bethesda acquisition, and when Xbox leadership first saw it, they didn't exactly like what they saw. However, it sounds like they just kind of decided to give Arcane creative freedom anyways, instead of flat out canceling it. Now, we can kind of sit here and debate on whether or not that was the right decision, but according to Jez Corden, that actually was not an Xbox-made decision at all, but rather it was on Bethesda. You can see his post here, which says, "I can confirm Microsoft had no involvement in decisions to delay release Redfall, but maybe they should have. This is a straight young bloodening." So that information actually does reveal quite a bit. There has been this curiosity in how exactly Xbox and Bethesda will work together. They are two very different publishers, and they are seemingly kind of operating in that way still, and it seems like, at least in this situation, Xbox is, after all, letting Bethesda call the shots for their own studios instead of stepping in themselves. Xbox, once again, is taking that hands-off approach here. But you have to kind of wonder how long they're willing to do something like that when you have a game like Redfall that, quite frankly, has left a blemish on their brand. This, after all, is their first big AAA game in quite some time. And then on top of that, it's a $70 game. Their first $70 game, in fact. A game they also heavily advertised. And I mean, it just completely missed the mark. I don't think that there's any other way to put it. So while that hands-off approach can be good at times, we've seen some creative games made because of that approach, such as Hi-Fi Rush. You have Pentiment, games like Grounded. But if they really didn't believe in Redfall when they first saw it, that also kind of shows you the flip side of the coin. I mean, I get it. I know Xbox probably didn't want to step on Bethesda's toes here, especially right after a big acquisition. It's probably not good for morale when a big company like Microsoft comes in and then just cancels projects. I imagine these studios would have been furious if Microsoft just came in and canceled their projects that they previously had no decisions in making. But there's definitely an argument to be made here that they should have stepped in. I think, if anything, this just kind of supports my theory, though. I said yesterday, I believe Xbox and Bethesda gave up on Redfall. I think after a year delay, they knew it wasn't going to get much better, so they just kind of decided to go ahead and cut their losses. That way Arcane can simply move on to their next game, which apparently they already are working on something else. In the meantime, though, both Xbox and Bethesda are going to need to use Redfall as a learning experience for that publishing combo. They will need to better learn to work with each other in the future, and Xbox will need to learn when it's necessary to step in. Now, we also got another update for Mortal Kombat 12. I mean, I think by this point, we kind of know that this game exists and that its announcement is probably sooner rather than later. Well, about that, Mortal Kombat just turned 30 years old, which honestly is kind of hard to believe for me. I remember when these games were controversial and that it was just all over the news for its gore and its brutality. But, I mean, here we are, 30 years old. I'm getting old, you guys, but anyways, the reason that we're talking about this today is because they posted a celebration video thanking fans and everything, and then right at the end, Ed Boon simply said, "Thank you, Mortal Kombat fans, for 30 years of amazing support, and we're not quite done yet." Then you see some kind of small teaser-like clip follow shortly after. So yeah, this seems to be yet another tease for Mortal Kombat 12, which increasingly appears to be set for 2023 or maybe even early 2024. I mean, even the Warner Brothers CEO earlier this year at a financial call alluded to Mortal Kombat 12 being planned for this year. So what I'm thinking here is that its full-blown announcement will possibly come within the next 60 days at one of these various showcases that are currently planned. Maybe the Summer Game Fest, that could be a good place. There's also the Xbox showcase, and then there's even that rumored PlayStation event. That one is sounding huge. So if they want to, there's definitely plenty of opportunities here for a possible reveal within the next 60 days. Either which way, the FGC is, I mean, they are living the dream right now with Street Fighter 6, Tekken 8 coming soon, and now possibly also Mortal Kombat 12 as well. I mean, that would be back-to-back-to-back massive fighting games. Speaking of showcases, though, we might as well go and talk about the Xbox showcases, as in plural. That's planned for June 11th, and now also apparently June 13th as well. It just kind of seems like this event keeps growing bigger and more grand by the day, and what's happening here is that they have the Xbox Bethesda showcase set for June 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be the main event where we'll get various announcements and gameplay for both first-party and third-party games. More on that here in just a moment, but then right after that, they'll have the Starfield Direct, where they plan to do a deep dive into all that game has to offer. Now, considering just the sheer ambition and the size of that game, I mean, there's a lot going on with Starfield. So yeah, I think that that's more than necessary. This game definitely needs to show out. This game is probably their most important release that we currently know about. So they're going to need to make a major push with this game over the next few months. There's just a lot to explain when it comes to Starfield. Now, to add to all this, though, on June 13th, much like last year, they confirmed that they'll have an extended showcase, which more or less is where developers talk about the games that they announced at the main event. This is where you'll get those more in-depth interviews and discussions, which is, this is actually a great setup by Microsoft. See, what this allows Xbox to do is that on a first day, they can just pump out announcement after announcement with little to no slowdown. I mean, back in the E3 days, showcases often did have these long segments of developers talking about said games rather than actually showing new games. And while that can definitely be interesting, I enjoyed it very much. But however, some fans would get bored of that. So what Xbox is kind of doing here is that they're giving fans the best of both worlds with 2, or actually 3 separate showcases. All things considered, though, this is that E3 setup, and it does feel like Xbox has got a good grasp on how to structure these big showcases. I feel like they've done a good job with that in recent years, and it sounds like that will continue into 2023. Now, the main focus really then kind of becomes, does Xbox actually have the games to fill 3 different showcases and make them, actually interesting? Well, I think just kind of going over the already announced games that we know about, there's plenty of big announcements that could potentially show up here. I mean, I don't know if they're going to give us an update for every single game that we know about, but I do think that there's a good chance that we will get an update for both Avowed and Hellblade 2 at the very least. It does sound like that both of those are close to releasing, and we could see some gameplay here with some possible release dates, or at the very least, release windows. Forza 8, that one will also likely get a release date here as well. I mean, we do know that that is planned for this year, so we probably will get its official release date at this showcase. Then there's Contraband. This is another game that we haven't heard about for quite a while. This is a third-party partnership, and I would expect to see some gameplay on that one sometime here soon. There's also Stalker 2, Perfect Dark, Fable, and State of Decay 3. These are big, anticipated exclusives, and while sure, some of those might be a little further out still, there is still that chance that they could possibly give us some updates for some of those games as well. One thing that really caught my attention with their announcement here, though, is that they are teasing brand new games as well from their internal studios. They did quote unquote say, join us for some new surprises and first looks from our incredibly talented internal studios and our many creative partners around the world. So this is a possible sign that we will hear about some of their unannounced internal projects as well. Now, from who is kind of the question here. Now, just kind of looking around, I think a few candidates might be maybe double fine. We haven't really heard from them for quite some time. We do know that they're working on multiple projects. Then you have Compulsion Games, the studio behind We Happy Few. They've been working on a new IP for several years. NXL, that's yet another. We do know that they're working on a big RPG compared to what they did with Wasteland 3. And then there's also Bethesda studios like id Software, as an example. It's been 3 years since the release of Doom Eternal, so we are closing in on their next expected game as well. There's even games like Indiana Jones. Maybe they show an update for that one as well. Either way, though, this showcase is starting to ramp up the hype, but let me know what you all think. Do you have any guesses as to who and what will be announced here? Now, interestingly enough, we also have a new console to talk about today because those PlayStation 5 rumors are starting to heat up. In fact, Tom Henderson, which has a great track record in terms of leaks, flat out said that he has 100% confirmation that the PlayStation 5 Pro is indeed in development. We can actually take a look here at his full quote, which states, "It's been a hot topic of discussion as of late, but yes, Insider Gaming has previously revealed that Sony does have a PlayStation 5 Pro in development. Our report in March was dismissed as being inaccurate by many when it was first reported, and although the PlayStation 5 Pro could be canceled at any given time, Insider Gaming can report with a 100% degree of certainty that the PlayStation 5 Pro is currently in development. Whilst we cannot report on any more specifics at this time, we understand that the first dev kit prototypes will be going to first-party developers within the next couple of months, with third-party developers receiving them by the end of this year." He then notes that its tentative expected release date is Q4 2024. So yeah, I mean, there it is. And I think this is one of those topics that will both excite and then also kind of annoy people at the same time. One side of the spectrum, there's going to be those fans that are like, what in the world? I just finally got a PlayStation 5, and now here we are hearing about a PlayStation 5 Pro already. What's the deal with that? However, and this is the more important part here, is that on the other side of things, there's absolutely going to be a lot of excitement from certain fans that wants the most power that they can possibly get. I think it's important to keep in mind that when it comes to these upgraded, enhanced consoles, they're more or less an option and nothing more. These consoles aren't meant to overtake the first iteration, and in fact, the original PlayStation 5 will likely continue to be the top seller even after this. But for those that do want the best of the best, that's where these Pro models comes in. I think with that, though, for me at the very least, I think the question then kind of becomes, what are their plans to improve the PlayStation 5 with this new Pro model? And the only thing that I can kind of think of here is maybe ray tracing. If you remember right, ray tracing was a massive talking point leading into this generation of consoles. But so far, I mean, that feature has kind of been a letdown because the performance trade-off really isn't worth it for a lot of people. But what if Sony came out and released a Pro model that is better suited to have ray tracing, all while maintaining better frame rate than what we currently see with the original PlayStation 5. We have seen this in previous Sony patents. It does seem like they're doing the research to boost or accelerate ray tracing. So with that in mind, would fans find that enticing enough to buy a Pro model to have a more stable 60 frames per second with good resolution and with ray tracing at the same time? Would that be a good enough marketing term to push these out to a considerable amount of consumers? Either which way, though, a late 2024 release, while might sound soon for a Pro model, this does actually put us at a similar trajectory as the PlayStation 4 Pro. That console also launched 3 years after the original PlayStation 4, so this idea of a PlayStation 5 Pro coming soon, possibly next year, isn't really all that far-fetched as some might think. Now, we do have one last thing to talk about today, as we got some good news and then also some bad news for Midnight Suns. This game did launch on the Xbox Series, PlayStation 5, and PC last year, but it is supposed to get a staggered release for other platforms in 2023. However, things have since changed. So first, we'll talk about the good news. They did just announce the release date for the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. It's now set to release on May 11th, digitally. As of right now, it doesn't sound like a physical release is planned. So kind of take that as you will. But what about the Switch? I think that's the platform that fans were a little bit more hopeful for. But That's the unfortunate part about this news. The Switch version has now officially been canceled. They didn't really go into detail as to why or anything like that. They just casually noted that it's no longer happening, and then they just kind of moved on. I do have a sneaky suspicion here, though, that it might have been because of its underwhelming sales results. This game didn't exactly shatter expectations, so I do kind of wonder if 2K just decided the extra work for the Switch version isn't worth it by this point. I mean, it's hard to say, though, but I just think that this is yet another example on why we need that Switch successor. If that console was already a thing right now, I imagine a cancellation like this probably wouldn't even happen in the first place, because they wouldn't have to do all that extra work to get it running on the Switch. It is what it is, though, but if you are still on the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4, at the very least, Midnight Suns will be out on May 11th, again, digitally, just a little over 1 week from now. Let's go ahead and move on over to the poll of the day, though, and with the PlayStation 5 Pro report, I wanted to ask you all, if you already own a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X, would you be willing to buy an enhanced Pro model later on? And as you can see here, 27% of you did actually say yes, while 67% of you said no. So this just kind of takes me back to what I said earlier. While the majority will likely stick with those base models, there is still a good portion of people out there that do want that extra power, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I myself bought the Xbox One X last generation, and I thought it was a great console. I thought it was definitely worth the money, or at least for me. So, if you do like the idea of getting a PlayStation 5 Pro or an Xbox Series Z or whatever the heck they want to call it, that's great. I'm always for more options. If you don't want it, no big deal. You can just kind of move on. But if you do want that extra power, you certainly have that choice. So I'm never against that. But what I think that these results do tell you here is that this is exactly why PlayStation, and also likely Xbox eventually, will invest into a more powerful upgrade than what we currently have now. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.